Pete, we know Social Network, King's Speech, out front for Best Picture, yada, yada, yada. But there are inklings around town among us pundits that maybe The Fighter could pull off an upset. Where do you stand on that?
Yeah, I absolutely do think The Fighter could pull off an upset. I think this is a really interesting Best Picture race. I don't think it's as slam dunk as a lot of people think, either way, for Social Network or King's Speech. You know, I vacillate between which one there, and now I'm really hearing so much on The Fighter, particularly from older voters who really seem to like this movie. I'm feeling a little bit of a crash momentum of something just sneaking in here, you know, and gaining momentum among the Academy voters. And I do think that, you know, we'll have to see. As we both know, Oscar races are all about momentum, and it's where you are when the votes are coming in, and we're not even there yet.
Sure.
But I think right now, at this point, The Fighter is doing really well. It opened wide this week, and it's doing decently at the box office. We'll see how it progresses during the holiday season, but I think that can only help it too if it proves out to be a good box office performer. Then it moves up.
Right. We know that both Social Network and King's Speech are. You can make an excellent case for both of them winning Best Picture, but they both have a flaw. In the case of Social Network, it doesn't have a rooting factor. These are despicable characters doing terrible things. But it has the director component, and we know normally that means that carries the Best Picture victory. However, the King's Speech, of course, has the heart. That has a lot of people rooting for it. People love the movie, but it doesn't have the director. You can't. It's going to be a little tough for Tom Hooper to win DGA, for example.
I think it's going to be very tough. I think this is one of those years that you could have definitely, no matter what wins, a split. If it's The Fighter or if it's King's Speech, for instance. I think neither one of those directors are likely to win Best Director. I think it's more likely to be David Fincher for Social Network, or even Christopher Nolan if they want to go in that direction.
That's right.
You know, over the two that might be favored for Best Picture, which is going to be an interesting year if we have that split. So yeah, I think it's like a really interesting.
It's a wonderful race for us this year because The Fighter has the rooting factor.
Yeah,
and people are a little bored already as early as this race is with the whole fight between Social Network and King's Speech.
Yeah.
And the attraction of The Fighter, we have to talk about this, is it's not just a boxing movie.
No.
I love the headline that New York Magazine's Vulture gave to this was, they said it's not Raging Bull, it's Raging Family. This is a movie not just about what the fight in the ring, but it's about the dynamic of family, and it does it beautifully.
Yeah, no, it's got that Rocky component, it's got the Raging Bull component, but it's a true story, and with these people, like, you just go like, whoa. I mean, they're wild, and the real people are around to walk around and say how true it is to life. And that's always a plus. When you have the people living and it's about them and they can go around and do interviews and say, wow, this really is our story, that makes it all the more credible, I think, with Academy voters. It's like, I just think it's a really interesting year. I think if they want to give it to Social Network, it's a return to that socially, meaningful movie that the Academy has honored in the past, like an On the Waterfront or that sort of film, and it would be a nice return to that. If they want to give it to King's Speech, that's the traditional kind of movie we think of Academy in the past. It may not be the membership that's there now, though, in a big number. And if they want to do The Fighter, it's that underdog story, that comes in from nowhere that the Academy loves to anoint that nobody else has. Sort of like they did with Crash. What's very interesting, though, is I've talked to voters this week about Social Network, and they really admire it, but they don't love it.
Right.
And King's Speech, a lot of them that I've talked to are watching it on their screeners now. They've gotten the screeners. I just talked to two people that just watched it on a screener a couple of days ago, and felt it was like an HBO movie.
Right.
That's
I heard
the quote
Masterpiece
I got.
Theater. I know,
yeah.
same thing. I know.
And my response to that is, everything is a television movie if you're watching it for the first time on television. And if they do watch that, it is going to appear that way because of the basic material there. That could be damaging to King's Speech.
That's a very good point.
Yeah, it really could be.
Yeah. Inception and Toy Story 3 are on the outside.
Yeah.
If Christopher Nolan, as you just brought up the possibility, wins DGA, and that could very well happen.
Yes.
All of a sudden the momentum could change, and it could go the race and take a sudden turn at the end. Now, what's interesting about that is it's happened in the past. It happened where the derbies, for example, the year of Godfather 2. Godfather 2, Coppola won DGA. They won nothing before that. Won DGA and then it won. And the other example is Midnight Cowboy. Schlesinger won DGA and then it won Best Picture. But it was overlooked earlier. It would be a lot of fun to see one of those years, wouldn't it?
Oh my gosh, yeah. I think I always look for that because it always seems to fall in line predictably. What wins Best Director, then wins Best Picture. Boring. We want to see it mix up. And I do think that there is a precedent in recent years for people actually looking at the director's race differently than they look at the picture. And that sort of thing. I think you have two examples really with Fincher and Nolan of dazzling dazzling directorial talent, out there. And I can see Nolan absolutely coming in out of nowhere. And,
and they have a big IOU. They stiffed him the year of Dark Knight, of course, and had to change the whole Best Picture thing. But then we have.
I don't think they feel that's an IOU.
I know.
Well,
I do. I'm still holding the grudge.
The average voter doesn't think we don't really owe this guy that's made 7 movies anything.
I know.
Except that he is a dazzling talent and he is saving Hollywood in a sense, or at least Warner Brothers.
Absolutely.
With one hit after another.
He's also admired and liked.
Yeah.
And we keep hearing this in this town that David Fincher is not and David O. Russell is not. These are not those huggable guys on the planet, let's put it that way.
Yeah.
But there are many guys who were in the similar situation, James Cameron being one of them, of course, winning for Titanic. Is that an issue?
No, I really think that's overblown to say that, they don't really like these people. Maybe a few don't like it, but, that goes on anything. There's a lot of people that don't like a lot of people in a lot of categories.
I know.
It doesn't affect the overall vote, and I don't think people in the Academy at large, if David O. Russell should get into the director's race, one of the 5 nominees, that will even realize that, he's not that well liked by certain people. He has had his blow-ups on sets. We know all the stories with George Clooney and all of that on Three Kings, and we've heard about it on Huckabees and different movies with Lily Tomlin. I've heard stories. But I can't begin to tell you. I think he's also, if that did happen and he did have that reputation, he's going around town right now being Mr. Nice Guy, and he's a very nice guy, and I think they're going to look at the movie and say, does this deserve, directing, and does it certainly deserve a nomination? So I don't think that's going to factor in. David Fincher, no. David Fincher's been in the Oscar race recently. He's proven he can do things other than Zodiac 7, those kinds of movies, those darker kind of
Benjamin
movies.
Button, of course,
with Benjamin Button, which is a huge breakthrough technically, and won 13 Academy Award nominations. He certainly would have won had it not been for Slumdog Millionaire that year. I don't feel the hate for David Fincher at all in this town. I feel admiration. And I think what he did with Social Network is phenomenal. It's a great, great movie. And a lot of that is to his credit. He took this script, made it work, because when you have a movie that's basically people on computers,
absolutely right,
that's really hard to pull off. And Fincher, no matter what happens here, I think would have to be considered the front runner for Best Director this year.
Is Toy Story 3 totally out of it now, since it didn't win LA Film Critics? We were kind of hoping that it would win one of those film critic awards, like LA, of course, went with Wall-E, and it might get the momentum. Is it still in this race?
No, I think so, especially that we're looking at a really close Best Picture race here, with a lot of split possibilities. And there are those people, I heard Diane Keaton say the other day, for her, the Best Picture of the year is Toy Story 3. If there's voters like that out there, absolutely it can get in. Of course, the hurdle everybody knows, no animated picture has ever won. Of course, no horror picture had ever won before Silence of the Lambs. No Western had ever won. No fantasy picture had ever won, before Lord of the Rings. No sequel had ever won before Godfather 2. There's always some precedent to break. But I think that this one, has a bigger hurdle because it's got its own category, and the Academy at large, which is basically ruled by the actors branch, has a hard time saying Best Picture of the Year, especially when they're going to vote for it for animation. That's a leap, and it's the hardest one to do, but people love Toy Story 3, so it's going to have its contingent. It can sneak in with enough of those people.
It'll certainly be nominated. The question is, can it win?
No.
And you don't think it can win?
No, I agree with you. It's definitely going to be nominated, but I do think it could win.
I do too. I think to the point that you're making, that there is so many strong contenders in this race that it could get in. And it could get in for another reason, Pete, and that is we know that they have been straining to make exceptions to the old rules recently with movies like No Country for Old Men and The Hurt Locker, which are so atypical Oscar. That tells us something. That tells us that they want to break out of the mold of the old English Patient epic.
No, it doesn't tell us that. It tells us that that they're looking at what the critics groups are voting for.
Right, right.
That's what it tells us. The last 3 movies that the Academy have picked, they've followed like lemmings, followed the critics groups, you know, and so those movies, whatever those movies are, suddenly become attractive. It gets them to watch it. But Hurt Locker never would have gotten anywhere without that critical support that it had with the critics groups. No Country for Old Men might have, because that year you had like a lot of dark movies like There Will Be Blood, so it was a choice between slit this wrist or slit that wrist, you know.
No, you're right.
And one I'm leaving out. But I mean, it's like all of these movies that, A Slumdog Millionaire, also made by the critics groups, you know. And so boom, 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 we're seeing the Academy following. The last original idea the Academy had was Crash. That was theirs, you know.
Because it wasn't even nominated at the Golden Globes.
No.
Right, and no critics group picked it,
That was theirs, you know. And I don't think, actually, speaking of the Golden Globes, that they're actually going to follow the Golden Globes anyway, and we're not going to see The Tourist nominated here.
No, oh my gosh, Pete, how shocking is that? How shocking is that? All right, so the Best Picture nominees will be Social Network, or King's Speech, and Fighter are locks. Toy Story 3, Inception are in, and Black Swan. Yeah. The question is...
Black Swan's one we haven't talked about.
I know. I love that movie.
And I think that's really coming on very strong. It's turning into a box office powerhouse.
Right.
And it's really surprising people that they're liking it as much as they are, you know. So especially with the older Academy voter who we thought, they're going to stray on this one. But Black Swan's got some appeal. Don't knock it out.
I hope not, because it's my movie of the year. Kids Are All Right was not necessarily all right. National Board of Review didn't put it on its list. It did come through strong at the New York Film Critics. It got shut out of LA Film Critics, but it seems to be hanging in there, right? And it has enough passionate followers that those #1 votes or high-ranked votes that it should at least get on the top 10.
I think it's in the top 10.
Yeah,
I think it's lately it's come up enough. It's gotten all the list it needs to. It did very well at SAG, with nomination for ensemble and 2 other acting nominations. There seems to be a lot of support within the industry for it. It's a comedy, dramedy, different than the other things that are up, you know, in potentially in the top 10. And I think it's well liked enough, definitely, to get into the top 10.
So we have 7 solid contenders there. The question of what are the other 3? And we have the 3 most likely: The Town, Winter's Bone, and True Grit, which got shut out of the Golden Globes. That was surprising.
Yeah, but it got 11 Critics' Choice nominations and got 2 SAG nominations. It's the Coen brothers.
I know.
It's a very solid remake. We'll see how the Academy at large thinks about it, but I think they're going to like it. So I think that's in.
And what about The Town and Winter's Bone?
I think The Town's come up. I'm a little surprised that The Town did not get more love in some of these precursor awards. That dampened it a little bit, but I do think, you know, in a field of 10, The Town sneaks in. It gets in. I think it also probably gets maybe an adaptation screenplay nomination for Ben Affleck and his writing partners. And supporting actor with Jeremy Renner, and maybe a tech nomination here or there.
So what gets a 10th spot? Is it Winter's Bone, 127 Hours, Rabbit Hole, Shutter Island?
Well, all of these, I mean, take your choice. For whatever reason, I think
it hasn't been clicking, has it?
No,
127 Hours.
127 Hours just does not seem to be a movie that the Academy is rushing to watch. That worries me about its inclusion in the top 10. That's why
I think it's
low turnout at its official Academy screening is a telltale sign. Not that that matters in the end, but the fact that people weren't rushing to see it at all there, considering Danny Boyle won their top award 2 years ago, that was a bit surprising. I also hear that people just can't bring themselves to pop it into the player. I mean, stories like that. Certainly some are, and it's gotten all the reviews, and it's hung in there on these precursor awards with some recognition. But I have a feeling it could be edged out by the indie darling, the true indie darling, Winter's Bone.
Yeah, I think you're right. So I think we have the top 10 there. We just have to figure out what's going to win, Pete.
Yeah.
Thankfully, we have some time.
Right.
Thanks.